Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 shows. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism. Thank you so much for being here, for being part of our journey. This is episode number 96. We've been on the air for 96 straight days as we are dealing with this pandemic and the lockdown. That's 96 straight days of conversation, 96 days of learning, and 96 days of insights from some of the world's leading experts in various topics. We're trying to understand three crises in America: the health, financial, and racial inequality crises. We want to hear from you, and we want guests and theme suggestions. We're on episode 96. That means 3 months plus of a lockdown. Today, we are honored to host Dr. Sumun Pendakur. She's the Chief Learning Officer and Director of the USC Equity Institutes at the USC Race and Equity Center. And she will share with us her insights and her thoughts on where we are in the world right now. We want everyone to hit share on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. Please share, please retweet. You know someone who would benefit from learning about this, someone whose life you can change by changing their attitude. So please do follow her and connect with us. Hi, everybody. I'm Sree, and I'm honored to be with you. Putting together these daily shows has been a big cooperative effort. I do a little bit of the work, but folks like our producers, Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon, and Rose Horowitz 31, do the heavy lifting. You know who else does the heavy lifting? You guys, the viewers, people who've been watching on and off for 96 days. Some of you have watched every day. Some of you have watched most days, and I've learned so much from all of you. Your comments make this not another Zoom call. That's what the idea of the show was. And I'm so grateful to all of you. We're also grateful to our sponsors, and I'll be thanking them in just a minute. But of course, we're grateful to all our guests. We are at day 96, but at day 75, I put this together, a chart that shows us how many guests we've had in the first 75 days. We had 155 guests. And I'm sure in the 20 days since, we've had another 20 guests at least, maybe 30 guests from 10 countries, and we've had more than 1 million viewers. And I love that we've had 91 women out of the 155 guests. That ratio could even be higher, but it only happens because of inclusion and intentionality. And that's what we are bringing to this process. We are grateful to partner with Scroll.in, one of India's leading news, information, and culture websites. Do check out Scroll.in. And we would love to have you involved in our shows. Give us your ideas, and please participate. Let me tell you what's coming up this week. It's a real terrific list of speakers. Yesterday, we met Professor Herford, a distinguished journalist who helped shape American television. I'll show you in a minute how he did that, and a moment from world history that he was a witness at. I'll show you a picture in just a minute. He was my former professor. He was last night. Tonight is Dr. Sumun Pendakur. And then tomorrow, Nick Kristof and Cheryl Wu Dunn. On Wednesday night, Mitchell Silver, the New York City Parks Commissioner, will be with us. On Thursday, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan and Dr. Sylvia Bryant. One is the WHO chief scientist, and the other is the director of pandemics at WHO. I'm almost smiling as I say it because we can't believe this is the quality of speakers that we're getting this 1 week. And then June 19th is our 100th show. It also happens to be Juneteenth, which many of you know about in recent years or recent days. You've been paying more attention. A holiday celebrated by the Black community, but not very much by most other folks. And it's on the 19th. And we have Noliwe Rooks will be here. She's the W.E.B. Du Bois Professor of Cornell University. She'll be here. Brandy Harden will be here. She's a board member of Justice Aid. And we'll have other guests to celebrate, to mark not just the 100th show, but also the anniversary of the end of slavery in the United States. So thank you all for being here. Please tag a friend. Please share with a friend right now. They can watch it later, even if they can't watch live. We're so grateful to all of you for being here. Let's thank our sponsors. First, globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org from Rutgers. If you know anyone who has a teenager, please tell them about this virtual teen camp that will feature experts from Cognizant, Angie's List, Google, Facebook, among many others. Get 20% off with the code SREE, S-R-E-E. Take a screenshot of this or take a photo of this and send this to them right now and get 20% off. They also have all these great speakers and one terrible speaker, me, and I will be participating in that and giving tips about social media to your teenagers. And that'll be funny because teenagers need no help from us in social media. We also want to thank our sponsors, Art & Co. Get involved with the world's largest online art auction fundraising for COVID-19 victims. artandco.net, ARTAND co.net. Please participate in this very important charity. We also want to thank Muckrack Academy for helping me create Fundamentals of Social Media for Journalists, PR pros, and everyone, a free certification course going live this Wednesday at 11 a.m. But it's going live, but it's sort of like Netflix live, meaning it's all on demand. You can do the entire course in one day, or you can take your time with it. mrac.co/social. Almost 4,000 people have signed up for that course, and so can you. And finally, we want to tell everybody about our very special Father's Day promo for this show. Thank a father figure in your life, grandfather, uncle, male role model on Father's Day. Take a photo of this. Go to digimentors.link/Father's Day, and we will post the picture that you give us, as well as a message you want read out loud on Father's Day on our two shows, the evening show and the morning New York Times read-along. This time's guest is Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times, is going to be with us. You don't want to miss that show anyway, so why not thank a father figure on American Father's Day? I don't know when Father's Day is elsewhere. On the screen, you see me and my father, and our executive producer, Neil Parekh, with his father, who is someone I've known for very much longer than I knew Neil Parekh, but I knew his dad, a wonderful man who passed away about 11 years ago. So tell us where you're watching from. Please join us. We're so grateful to all of you for being here. And I think we're now ready to bring on Dr. Pendakur. I told her I'll warn her before she comes on camera. And I know she spent the last 5-6 minutes sharing, tweeting, passing this on to everybody. And I want you to do the same. Tell us where you're watching from so that she can know the global audience that we are bringing to her right now. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Sumi Pendakur. Hello.
Hi, Sree. It's so good to see you. Thank you for having me tonight in these intense, mind-blowing times that we're in.
Yeah, I know. This would be a reunion under different circumstances. We met more than 20 years ago. You were still in high school, and you were already, you had ideas that you wanted to do big things, change the world. And then I've not seen you since. We've talked online or seen each other online, but here we are meeting under these circumstances. But I'm so proud of everything you've done and the heights you've scaled. Tell us first the question I ask everybody. How are you? How's your family? How are you doing through this pandemic?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Sree. And really, it is a thrill to see you. For those of you who don't know, Sree and I go way, way back. My father was actually a film professor at Northwestern University. And through those connections to the South Asian communication circles, he and Sree got to know each other. Shree's been to our house at my childhood home. So this is a reunion of sorts for us through these distant modes. How am I doing? Let's see. Anyone who right now is a working parent navigating lockdown and no childcare knows exactly what I'm going to say, which is that this is relentless. This is absolutely relentless. And, it's so layered, right? We have, of course, navigating the context of a global pandemic, being separated in all of the ways from all the people we care about, from physical touch with others, from not experiencing graduations on high school and college campuses, all the things that bring joy and light and meaning to people's lives have been brought to a standstill so that we can do right by the nation and that we can get this under control as best as we can. And of course, at the same time, we have all of the continual systemic and structural injustices that have now exploded. And so if you ask me honestly, especially given my work and given my own orientation, I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. I'm grieving. I'm angry. I am full of rage and sorrow. And at the same time, and I'm a big believer in ands, not ors, watching the intense multiracial protest movement across the nation in every single state of this country, all around the world, from South Korea to France to India and beyond, in response to say, no, this can't keep going in this way, and that we can have something better. These are the things that give me those bright spots between the hecticity, the relentless nature, and the sort of overwhelming trauma of all of this for so many of our communities, and particularly for our Black siblings.
Thank you. That's as powerful an opening as we've gotten in this show, and we've had some incredible people sharing incredible stories. Thank you so much. Thank you for your honesty and directness. A lot of people like to pretend that they're, they have this armor up all the time, and you're showing that vulnerability that I think showcases the empathy that's built into your work. If you can talk a little bit about the organization that you're part of inside USC and its history a little bit, so that people can understand. I'll also pull up your website as you're talking. And reminder to everyone, please share this with your family and friends. Tag a friend, especially I'd say this to our South Asian colleagues and friends who are watching. We all know ignorant South Asian people who don't know enough about the history of South Asians, of African Americans in this country, and the immigrant experience. They have their own real lived reality, which of course is important. But one of the things, Sumi, that you wouldn't know is that on the show about 4 days ago, as we were talking to a wonderful expert actually from USC, Alyssa Richardson, a professor who's written a book about race and protests and smartphones and all these very serious topics, a fellow Indian American who's a friend of mine gets on in the comments and posts one kind of what you find in your racist WhatsApp uncles group, those kinds of posts. Oh, Black Americans got all these freebies, or that we have seen, didn't they, after slavery, didn't everybody get lots of free land? And these are like things that you can't believe in 2020. You have to correct an educated person, let alone one of my friends, publicly. If he had stopped, I wouldn't be calling him out. Even now, I'm not saying his name, but he posted these under his name in a public setting like this. So in part, we have you here, Sumi, to help us to get everybody to learn. But also, I want you to speak to our own people who, not all of them, of course, but way too many of them display tendencies and a fundamental misunderstanding of who they owe what in this country.
Right on. Let's go there.
Well, first, let's talk about the center and tell us that word first.
For sure. So I'm the Chief Learning Officer at the University of Southern California's Race and Equity Center, which is founded by Dr. Sean Harper, who, after a number of years at the University of Pennsylvania, uprooted the center that he had developed there and brought it to USC to take it to scale. And so our work is really about working with universities and colleges, working with the corporate sector, working with nonprofits and other organizations to essentially build the depth and breadth of capacity we know needs to be built around racial equity and racial justice. And it's for a lot of the reasons, Sree, that you and I are going to talk about today, that the sheer lack of knowledge, partially due to a white supremacist educational infrastructure, about how individuals and organizations at the meta level continue to function in really reproductive, anti-Black ways, but also harmful to all those who experience minoritization and marginalization. So we'll unpack that a little bit, but that's a little bit about what our center does. It's really about capacity building, skill building, providing tools, and then helping institutional participants, leaders, and other decision makers to actually make more righteous, more equitable, and more race-conscious decisions so that all of their, whether it's campuses or corporations, people can actually thrive in those organizations. You can actually get to the best possible outcomes, and you can achieve what people call the American dream, which for many is the American nightmare.
And this is where immediately you'll get pushback, because you're gonna be accused of oversimplifying things, of not being grateful, as people on the left are accused of being, or progressives, for what this country has given us. Why are we speaking out like this? So put all of this in context. Nothing I've said to you in the last 30 seconds is things you haven't heard before. So put that in context. We'll go to your website later, but I want to hear a little more about this first, please.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let's just be upfront about it, Sree. You had me into the space. I'm a leftist. I'm a feminist. I'm a critical race theorist. Those are some of my most trenchant underpinnings for how I examine the work and the world around me. So I think that the sort of general accusations about leftists or racial justice scholars and workers being ungrateful is a wonderful silencing tactic. It's actually quite effective, right? Because you spend so much time saying, no, I am grateful, I am, which of course, on many levels, I am. But that actually is a derailment tactic from getting to the heart of the issue, which is, I don't just want to be grateful. I want every single person who lives in this country, whether they are the descendants of slaves or the descendants of Native peoples who were colonized and against whom genocide was performed, or whether they were choice-based migrants and immigrants or involuntary migrants and immigrants, whoever it might be, if we're actually going to talk about this word grateful, then to get to that place requires specific and concrete actions so that every single person who calls himself an American can say, yes, I'm grateful. Otherwise, we're just propagating a lie. And my daddy didn't raise a liar, so we have to call it out for what it is. And it's okay to go back and forth about how is it that so many people, for example, like your friend that you referenced to, who came onto your show and put all of these sort of really pretty overtly racist and classist statements and posed as questions. How is it that people could continue to spout that, like you said, in 2020? And so this, again, is, I think, part of my passion around my work is unpacking the miseducation so many people of all backgrounds receive under the structures of whiteness, not white people as individuals, but the structures of whiteness as they permeate every facet of American living, from our educational systems to our media structures to literally everything. If you have imbibed that Kool-Aid for your entire lifetime, it takes time to actually, for all of that to be pulled apart. And this is why we can sit in conversations with people who literally have never seen the same information as you and me, who don't walk in the same roads as you and me, and we have to be able to find a space to actually share that information with folks. Now, information sharing doesn't always necessarily lead to change in action, which is why we need multiple forms of action. We need direct action. We need protest. We need votes. We need strikes. We need labor stoppages. All of it part and parcel if we're going to advance any form of systemic justice.
Thank you, Sumun. Let's do this. Let's show people where people are watching from, and then let's also go into some of the terms that you use that people may not be familiar with, right? Some of the terms that you use in your daily work, critical race theory. These are things that people don't always know. So let's make this, partly an education of the people who are watching. Let's get the comments. Everyone, tell us where you're watching from. Jonathan Borstein watching 96 days in a row from Union Square. And by the way, as I name places, someone, if you want to just jump in, if you've been there, you have any memories, any favorite foods, just jump in. That's part of what we try to do here. Radyan, who's been watching for so many days, watching from Center Reach, Long Island. Anand Babu from Andhra Pradesh in India. Where's your family from in India?
Karnataka, so right next door to Andhra, Anand Babu.
And Fernando watching from LA, right near, LA is a huge place, of course, but Fernando, we want to make sure we get you and your thoughts on our show. Stefan's watching tonight. Greetings from Ramsey, New Jersey. And Stefan is part of my amazing team, which puts together virtual events and digital projects of all kinds. Our motto, Sumi, is telling people, don't cancel your conference without talking to us. And this is our ad that we have. We tell people we can help you with, we can be 10% of your production team or 110% of your production team. Contact us before you cancel your conference or before you put on another boring Zoom call. Call me and we will help you tell better stories online. Let's see who else is. Here. We're just going to go on here. Akash is watching from Singapore. Have you been?
Yes, I have been to Singapore. I can't wait to go back one day.
Rahadyan says, great shirt, Sree, flattering color. You can tell I like the purple. My team was horrified when I debuted the purple motif of the project, and now they're stuck with it. Stefan says, I think Sree likes purple almost as much as the one and only Prince did. R.I.P. always. Yes. My dad's watching in Kerala. Hi, Acha. Love you. I'm so sorry that I'm not with you in Trivandrum. But let me ask Sumi if she's been to Kerala.
I have never been to Kerala. I've been to Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and to Tamil Nadu. But Kerala, coming up. Uncle, okay. I'm at your house next time.
Yeah, he'll be happy to host you. Our friend Fernando's asking when the Muckrack class is. It launches at 11 a.m. Eastern time, but it is not live. It's an on-demand class. It's sort of like, the Netflix debut. It drops on a Friday, but you could watch it 10 Fridays from then or that day if you want to. Neil is saying, send in your submission for Father's Day, digimentors.link/Father's Day. And Jerry Wan is watching, says, hi, Sumi. And so these might be some of your friends here, which is great. And look who's here. Tell us who this is.
Well, I want to mention Jerry, who runs a wonderful podcast called Dear Asian Americans. You have to check that out. It is outstanding, phenomenal. And then the next person you just flashed to, Manjunath Pendakur, my dad. So I think my dad and mom are tuned in. He says, so good to see you, Sree, after such a long time. So, hi, Appa. Hi, Amma.
When was the last time you saw them?
February, when they came for my son's 7th birthday.
Oh, very nice. Well, your dad is a hero to so many of us, a trailblazer in mass communication studies in the United States, a South Asian who broke a lot of barriers, and we're so grateful for his leadership in the work he's done at Northwestern. You're a Northwestern brat, right? You grew up there, so. Andrew says, thanks for hosting all of these live streams, tuning in from Seattle. And this is one of the things we talked about yesterday, Sumi, that the media has portrayed, the right-wing media has portrayed Seattle as is complete crisis on fire. And CNN showed that there were like Buddhist drum circles and people praying and a kid's picnic all happening inside the zone that is such a tiny sliver of Seattle, but on Fox and Trump land, it looked like a giant conflagration. Rose says hello from Connecticut, one of our wonderful producers, and she'll be live tweeting. She says thank you. And Neil says that half of Father's Day proceeds will go to the charity theunusualsuspects.org. And my mom's watching from Kerala. Love you, Amma. Thank you for being here. Paula's watching from Tallahassee. Paula's on our team, a wonderful journalist and writer. And she's part of our team. And I want to pause there and just say to all of you that there was a tragic story out of Tallahassee. Sumin can tell us a little bit. I know it's breaking news, so maybe you can tell us what you know.
I only know the bare sketches of it, but a 19-year-old protester, and I'll attempt to do justice to her name, Olowatoyin Salau, 19-year-old protester, young Black woman, found dead after they searched for her for days. And it looks like it is turning into a murder case. And of course, this is linked on some levels to now we've had apparently 4 hangings or lynchings of Black men here in California, which the police are calling suicides with no investigation. So, and this is not new. If you remember, a number of the protesters and organizers post-Ferguson were found dead in suspicious circumstances as well. So every single time this happens, this increases the level of lived and vicarious trauma so many of our communities are experiencing, and again, particularly to center our Black siblings in this struggle, in this lifelong struggle. And so, I mentioned these, and I should say, even hearing this can be difficult for some. So I just really want to offer some space and grace for people who are psychologically and emotionally overwhelmed. The news intake and the amount of video coverage alone of Black people being murdered in the street is overwhelming. I'm not Black. I'm Indian American, South Asian American, Asian American, and my heart hurts. My stomach hurts. And so, again, putting myself in the shoes of those for whom this is their own community, we're essentially watching snuff films live, and it's a really broken part. And some would say it's a broken part of society, and some would articulate that this is our society in its very design, in its very inception, in its design, is simply enacting its goals, which is on some levels to maintain the suppression of those on the bottom rungs of this given society.
It's so painful to hear and very sad. I'm glad you were able to tell us the story. We had just the outlines of it, but this is something that somebody who is watching and trying to poke holes and trying to sow divisions will say, "Oh, look at this. This is happening in California. How is that possible? These are all, just the way they say a lot of these troubles are happening in democratic cities run by democratic mayors." This shows you that it's the progressives that are at fault for this, or it's the African Americans who are to blame. Address that issue, please.
Great question. That is such a useful tool of divisiveness to simply say, "Oh, well, there's a Black Democrat mayor in X place, therefore no violence can occur," or that suddenly that anti-Blackness and white supremacy and all of the forms and functions of racism that takes will be mysteriously and magically erased. And that's not actually the way power works, right? Power is vested and imbued, again, in the structures of society. So, for example, in how policing is conducted, in how banks give loans, in how schools get funding, in which children get access to which resources. These are all racially codified. They're part of the broader American racial project, which is about the distribution and allocation of specifically of resources. So this derailment tactic that, "Oh, well, see, those are Democrats, and therefore really it's just everybody," to be frank and totally blunt, Democrat or Republican, the vast majority of political figures don't actually articulate an anti-white supremacist, pro-racial justice worldview. And I don't just mean in words, I mean in the actual policies that they enact, right? It's very nice to, paint BLM on a street, Black Lives Matter on a street. It comes down to what sort of policies are being enacted. And I think that is very, very fine lines, for example, that leaders of color, and in particular, Black leaders walk, right? That to be perceived as the magical fixer of all racial problems, and at the same time to be part and parcel of a structure that was not designed to be fixed in that particular way, is a really difficult place to live in. So I just wanted to name all of those contradictions at the same time. As I said before, big believer in ands, not ors. All of these complexities live together. But I am a big believer in also pushing back against that type of derailment tactic that you just mentioned. Oh, how can it happen in California? Because California is racist. Sure.
And California is not one state, right? It's actually many states. There's Alabama inside California, as there is good, parts of Alabama in small pockets that might be more progressive or at least open to new ideas. I want everyone to follow Sumi on Twitter. She's Sumun L. Pendakur on Twitter. Please find her and check out her work. She's the passion that you hear for the work she's doing, the serious scholarship and leadership she's showing here also is reflected in the story she shares and tells online. Let's keep going. Sujana is here. Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar says, amazing opening statement, nuanced and empathetic. And she's absolutely right. And I want to, use this opportunity to tell everyone that Sujana, Dr. Chandrasekhar, has a new show that my team is executive producing, and we're so excited. It's called She's on Call, and the first episode just went up yesterday on Sunday, and you can see the episodes online at She's on Call on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. Please follow She's on Call, and these are not pictures you see every day. 4 women doctors. Our two friends Sujana and Marina host the show, and then they have 2 great guests every single Sunday. So please support the show and please share it with a friend. And we got such great feedback just the first time. So many people saying you've not seen 4 female doctors on a show, 3 women of color, et cetera, et cetera. So please do support the work that Sujana is doing. And when we talk about race, I think in this country, we also want to talk about the importance of gender equity. Also, it's hard to separate these different, they're not that different, right? Sunil Malhotra says, love you, Sumi Pendakur. Tell us about Sunil.
That is my beloved husband, partner in crime, and father of our 2 children, Shashi, who's 7, and Shama, who's 18 months.
Wonderful. And I noticed there were
outside on the balcony so that he could try to keep the volume down. It's dinner time, so they're screaming and excited.
Oh, thank you. Well, if it's okay, if they're listening, we'd love to have them come towards the end of the show and come say hi on camera. That'd be fun. Up to Sunil if the kids are still awake, which I presume they will be. Also, I was wondering because Sunil was giving you a lot of love on Twitter, so I just wanted to double check who that was. And Neil is pointing out the website is theunusualsuspects.org. That's the beneficiary of our Father's Day promotion. Please do check it out. Don says live from New York. That's right. This is live from New York. Rob is watching in Rye, New York. Thank you. Let's see who else is here. Jay says policy speaks louder than just allyship. So a lot of people are showing allyship, but what do they mean? What are they doing? Things like that. Sujana says after President Obama's first election, the president of the NAACP was asked if their organization no longer needed to exist. He had to point out that if it was not the National Association for the Advancement of a Colored Person, meaning not just one black man, but to help all African Americans, and that was the goal. So let's get back to our conversation here. By the way, Kamlesh says hi. Sumi, your fan, Auntie Kamal, is watching. So that is nice. And Sridhar is here. Do you want to give a shout out to Sridhar?
Absolutely. I'll give a shout out to Kamal Auntie and my Sri Kakka, who's my father's youngest brother, beloved younger brother. And he and my Susan Auntie live in Vancouver, British Columbia, with my 2 cousins, Rajesh and Kiran. And Kamal Auntie and her husband, Badri Uncle, have been my parents' friends since I think 1969, 1970, when they were involved in a South Asian radical political organization together back then, here in Canada.
Right. Sunil says, watching from our balcony, trying to keep the kids quiet. Sujana says, Kannadigas rule. So we've had our share of Kannadigas on the show. Let's see here. Manju says that we're in one of the most backward states in the Union, Florida. And Tracy says, love watching you in action and always learning from you. So these are your friends watching, which is great. Now here's on a serious point. We have a comment here from Somnath saying, Indian people are also racist. And this is something that we've discussed on the show before, but not enough. We have Bollywood stars that are saying Black Lives Matter, but who advertise fairness creams, which is a thing in India for our friends who have successfully avoided knowing anything about it. This is one of the horrors in India is they sell creams called Fair and Lovely and also something called Fair and Handsome for the men. So male actors, male celebrities endorse these kinds of things. So the fact that you could, say you support Black lives in America, but not support atrocity, not speak up against atrocities against lower caste Hindus or against Muslims, that's one of the things that is being pointed out in many circles. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. When they say all oppressions are interconnected, this is actually a great example of that. framework, right? That all oppressions are interconnected in some really significant and meaningful ways. It doesn't mean that all oppressions are the same. For example, I would never argue that my experiences are the same as an indigenous woman or a Black woman or a trans Chicana, for example. But that the way that we experience harm is linked, and the way that we achieve liberation is also linked. And so that's, I think, a critically important framework, because we need to be able to figure out what are our individual roles as individual actors, but also parts of structures and systems, whether we sit on school boards or whether we are teachers or whether we are lawyers, doctors, educators, whatever it might be. Construction workers, doesn't matter. You have a specific role to play as an individual and in that structure. So let's tie this all together, for example, to Somnath, who has said Indian people are also racist. Yes, correct, Somnath. Ding, 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 ding. You absolutely win on that one. Part of that is because everybody has the capacity to be prejudiced, to be oppressive in their actions, in their thinking, in the way they manifest their biases against others. I want to articulate something here, which is to distinguish between individual and interpersonal forms of oppression, prejudice, and bias, and structural and systemic racism, right? And so there's, of course, I have experienced bias and prejudice at the hands, for example, of Black kids. I grew up in a majority Black neighborhood in South Evanston, as did my brother Vijay, with my parents there, and we experienced severe bullying and violence from Black kids who were trying to figure out where they sat in the social structure. And, it was really my dad who helped us understand, what does it mean to live in a neighborhood that is dealing with forms of intergenerational violence, poverty, other structures, and then how do people seek out who's lower on a particular social ladder. So that's me articulating that people can experience bias, prejudice, harm, violence at the hands of other minoritized peoples. But to separate that from structural and systems, which again is heavily manifested by the power of whiteness and white supremacy. Again, not necessarily individual white people. This doesn't take away from the individual struggles and pain of individual white people, but rather that to get a loan as a white person is easier because banks are structured in racist fashions. All the way from the redlining acts of the late 1920s under FDR's administration to today, right? These are codified in law and then in practice, between restrictive covenants in housing all the way to who can get a loan. And that has led to, for example, the largest wealth gap between Black and white families that may never be remediated unless we actually have reparations, true reparations in this country. So let's separate those. For us as Desis, as South Asians who actively participate in racism, and I want to specifically talk about South Asian immigrants to the United States. I'm the daughter, a child of immigrants, of course. We, number one, have benefited from the labor, hardship, blood, and sacrifice of Black and Native peoples in this country from the founding of this nation onwards. And we really can't live in this country without fully acknowledging that and owning that. And then two, to also really critically understand, and this is part, when I say white supremacist education, this is the education that is kept for most South Asian Americans and most Asian Americans writ large. That we are wedges, we are tools in this hierarchy around race in the United States, because the construction of Asian Americans, including South Asian Americans, as high achieving model minorities, not problem causing, not troublemaking, hardworking, all of those stereotypes that exist about our community are, first of all, based off of a selective immigration act, the 1965 Hart-Celler Immigration Act, which changed the type of Asians that were allowed to come to the United States, number one, versus the labor force that was brought in the 1800s all the way up until 1924 with the Asian Exclusion Act. That labor force was backbreaking labor to build the railroads, to work on plantations, etc., sugar plantations. Post-1965, when the United States needed a completely different labor force, they went to Asia after banning Asian immigration for 40 years to say, we want doctors, lawyers, engineers, students, because that was the height of the Cold War. America's hypocrisy was showing, fighting communism abroad while engaging in horrific forms of racism at home. But the biggest reason, and if any of you are interested in this, I would suggest reading Dr. Jane Chun's wonderful research called Coolie to Model Minority. And it talks about how labor selection shifted the perception of Asian immigrants, including, again, us, who benefited from that 1965.
Sorry, just give that name again. Sorry, can you just give that name again?
Jane, Jane, Chun, Junn, an Asian American political scientist. And you can search for it, easy to find on the Google map, the Googly, From Coolie to Model Minority, a must read to add to your, knowledge banks. In that moment, though, when we are constructed, and we are actually actively constructed, and Sree, you know this from being a journalist for decades now, that in 1966, two leading publications, the US News and World Reports and the Wall Street Journal, ran newspaper articles touting the success of Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans, essentially writing, look at these Japanese and Chinese immigrants. They've been through hardship. Of course, the Japanese, 110,000 put in American concentration camps during World War II, 65% plus of whom were US citizens born. Didn't matter, still put in a US concentration camp, never charged of a crime. They've struggled, they've sacrificed, and look how well they're doing. Why aren't those Black people doing as well? Think about what's happening in 1966 and 1968, again, at the height of the Civil Rights Movement, when Black people are saying that the hundreds of years of colonization and suppression and oppression can no longer go on, that something must dramatically change. And to come out with that wedge trope at that time, I choose not to be used. And there was a wonderful hashtag campaign a couple years ago called I Am Not Your Wedge. I'm not your wedge. I don't want to be your wedge. I don't want to be used against other communities, but that's how we are positioned. And the thing is, and here's the sad part, and you know this, Asian Americans, including South Asian Americans, Desi Americans, not all, but many are very happy to be honorary whites, to be on this eternal treadmill to whiteness that Vijay Prashad talks about, that you're never going to achieve, but that if you subscribe to American norms of meritocracy and playing these race games, that at least you won't be Black. And that's the dirty secret of how we're positioned here. And it's the hard work that we have to absolutely push against in this particular country. I'm seeing there's a comment here, all societies have unjust systems of systemic discrimination that give unfair advantages and preferential treatments of one group over another in a myriad of different ways without merit. How can we design systems for equity? Rick, thank you so much. If you'll give me 1 minute, I will get there. I just want to close out this thought about South Asians and our connection to racism. Part of our own story, in addition to the larger backdrop of the Asian American story that we are part of, right? Not in every way, but largely, is also the fact that from our own home countries, we have rampant colorism, we have rampant casteism, we have Brahminical bias, we have anti-Dalit prejudice, which results in the murder of Dalits on a regular basis. So all of those pieces, when I say all oppressions are interconnected, is because of this. When we have drunk that ideology in our home countries, and then we come here and we see media images and news stories that continue to propagate images of Black people, unless we actually do hard work to unlearn all of these scripts and codes, we continue to engage in the same forms of division, bias, prejudice, oppression, and racism. Because it takes actual movement away from that to turn away from the tide of what we have been taught. If anybody's interested, Equality Labs does incredible work that is Dalit-centered. I'd highly recommend looking up their work. Equality Labs, their website's beautifully designed. Thenmozhi Soundararajan is a Dalit activist. You can look up her writings as well. She's done some brilliant writing on unpacking caste privilege, specifically for those who identify as Hindu or Hindu adjacent. No matter where you sit, the depth of caste privilege and bias is so deep and so entrenched And so we need to be able to, as Desis, as South Asians, as anybody who identifies as Hindu or Hindu descent, needs to be able to rip all that apart in this unlearning process to actually figure out our positioning vis-a-vis Blackness and Native communities and white communities and others. Fundamentally, it comes down to me is that I refuse to be used. I don't want to be used that way, and I hope you don't either.
This website is equalitylabs.org, and this is where we're looking at political home for South Asian progressives. Equality Labs is an Ambedkarite South Asian power building organization that uses community research, political base building, culture shape-shifting art, and digital security to end the oppression of caste apartheid, Islamophobia, white supremacy, and religious intolerance. And you recommended them, so thank you for that. You wanted to answer Rick's question: how do we build systems with equity from scratch?
Wonderful. So I'll give an analogy from my field, which is higher education. So I've spent almost the last 20 years in my field, which is higher education, working in colleges and universities. I came up working through Asian American resource centers and multicultural student affairs, and eventually became a chief diversity officer at a STEM college. And then now here, I'm the chief learning officer at the USC Race and Equity Center. And so there's a couple things I would say to this. And pardon me, Sree, I know that my answers end up becoming like 55 times longer than you probably wanted, but thanks for giving me the space. Because none of these questions that you're asking, for example, this one about South Asians are racist too, it can't be answered in a pithy way. And I hope folks are okay with going with me on that journey a little bit. So designing for equity, I think first and foremost, having a really solid foundation of understanding, oh, there's Sean, of understanding what equity actually is. So equity mindedness begins with the premise that we understand that there is no level playing field. And part of the United States and many countries, especially those that use meritocratic models, is pretending like that there actually is a level playing field. And so that if people just work hard enough and play by the rules, that they can achieve at the highest of levels. An equity-minded framework, and I particularly want to reference the work of Dr. Estela Bensimon, Bensimon. She is a scholar activist. She was on my own doctoral committee, and she is an inspiration to any of us who do this work in the academy and beyond. Dr. Estela Bensimon's work on equity-mindedness, which really defined it for our entire field, to say that equity-mindedness means have a critical understanding of how the uneven playing field has actually played out for different communities. So what does it mean to approach, for example, higher education as an Indigenous student versus a Black student versus an undocumented student of any background versus a low-income student versus an Asian American or South Asian American student? So actually developing our own understandings of how people experience the environment, number one. Number two, where the unevenness might occur. So where are the different starting places? But here's the really important part and the exciting part about an equity-minded framework. A deficit-minded framework says when people have unequal or uneven starting places or uneven outcomes, you attribute those failures back onto the individual. Those people didn't achieve because they didn't work hard enough. Well, their community doesn't value education in the ways those communities do, right? And everyone has heard that kind of rhetoric before. What it does is it shifts the burden from the institution or the structural actors back onto the communities that are already experiencing harm to say, well, if you just fix yourselves, then everything will be fine and we don't need to change anything around you. Now, of course, here in this country, some of that deficit-minded framework originates from the Moynihan Report. 1965, Daniel Moynihan wrote a report commissioned by the US government at the time, which really established the entire sort of mental framework of the culture of poverty. That, in this case, Black communities have a culture of poverty that they will not be able to get out of poverty because their ways of living and their relationship to education and other social structures is abject and less than. That they culturally, if you flip this around, the Amy Chua book, Tiger, what is it? Hymn of the Tiger, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. You don't have to bother reading that. It's terrible. that also plays on a cultural argument, right? That Chinese families culturally have something magical that essentially Black and Latinx and Native communities don't. So if you follow this prescription, you can also achieve. Again, when it's completely uprooted from immigration histories and stories of intergenerational harm and violence, and who is a choice-based immigrant versus an involuntary migrant, all of those things, something like Amy Chua's Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother becomes irrelevant and meaningless, right? So we use these cultural explanations to explain away systemic injustices. The equity-minded framework takes all of that and says, no, we take responsibility in our institution, for example, in our hospitals. Why is it that Black women die at the highest levels of maternal mortality rates compared to white women and Asian American women and other women? So what is going on? One answer would be, well, I guess Black women just die in childbirth more, which is a sick response, and yet some people say those kinds of things. The other response is from the hospital administration system and from the medical profession to say, what is it about our ways of listening to Black women that are failing them? What is it about our medical textbooks that are failing Black women? What is it about the ways that we teach doctors to look for XYZ things is failing Black women who are dying at the fastest rates in childbirth? That is an equity-minded framework. It is much harder to do than simply blaming people for their own conditions. But what it does require is for each and every single institution to literally go back to its beginnings and say, in what ways did we design for the center? The center meaning we designed for white, upper and middle class people who were able-bodied, who had access to education. We designed for people who knew how to navigate the system. And so you got to rip that all apart and start over if you really want to design for equity. In that sense, it's a very exciting challenge because it gives us something concrete to do rather than to feel overwhelmed by the state of how terrible things are. So for me as an educator, one of the reasons I get up every single day is that I can go to work with my colleagues, I work with people all across the country, to work with other institutions to say, what is in your sphere of influence? What's in your sphere of influence under your locus of control that you can critically change and to enact equity-mindedness rather than deficit-minded or even standard ways of knowing and doing business, which end up creating harm for historically and currently minoritized and marginalized communities? I hope I answered your question. It's such a good question.
It was a good question, and I feel like I'm in your class learning so much, as thousands of people around the country and around the world will learn as well. We're very grateful to you. We want to just keep going. We've got a comment from Manju that takes up the whole screen, as you can see here. And most of us who immigrated from South Asia in the 60s came with our own baggage of class privilege, caste privilege, and educational advantages. We never really studied or understood 400 years of Black or Native people systemic oppression. When confronted with racism, we should have naturally empathized with Muslims, Dalits, and Adivasis in India, but that seems to have not happened for the most part. We should have, at the very least, be grateful for the civil rights struggles and sacrifices that didn't quite fit in, but you can see it on Facebook. I also want to acknowledge a big day today in America about for gay and lesbian and LGBTQ rights. The Supreme Court, this Supreme Court, which is so right-wing in the 5-4 majority that they have and trying to make that even worse, they voted 6-3 today to using the civil rights legislation from the 60s to say that there should be no discrimination against LGBTQ folks in workplaces. And it sounds obvious in 2020 that this should be the law of the land. And it took Neil Gorsuch to write the majority view here, which is kind of stunning for us to see. The three people who did, I knew without even reading who the three those who dissented were, and that was Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas, of course, and Brett Kavanaugh. And you remember the awful, terrible fight about Kavanaugh just last year. It seems like 2 years ago now. It seems like a lifetime ago. And but it shows you that allyship and everything is all interconnected. That we, all of us, stand here on the shoulders and the hard work put in by African Americans over centuries that lets us be, in my case, an overeducated, privileged Indian American to walk in and consider that I can be anything I want to be in America in a way that Americans born here who happen to be of color, or how about Native Americans? We barely talk about them. And acknowledging one of the things I learned, Sumi, you mentioned Canada. In Canada, I've been doing some work there when we could travel, and at various events, the first thing they do is they say what they call a land acknowledgement statement, where they say we're meeting on the land stolen from these indigenous people. It was stunning the first time I heard it, and you can imagine that you could say that. Imagine if every event in Manhattan started by talking about the land, stolen or otherwise gotten for $24 or whatever the story really is. That kind of awareness in Canada is certainly not there here in the United States, and the way we treat our Native Americans is so horrible.
Well, and this is, of course, the COVID. Your whole series is called COVID Call 19, and the impact of COVID on Black and Native communities has been outsized, right? That the Navajo Nation, first of all, many of the nations have been saying we are not getting our supplies. And these are various forms of punishment that the federal government, which is calling upon every federal government, which has been horrific to Native and Indigenous communities in this country, whether it's building pipelines through their communities or not providing supplies, or obviously committing genocide and mass land stealing from the very beginning, right? If we don't grapple with the foundations of this country, we don't actually get to honestly have a conversation about who we are today. And that's tied similarly to this honest conversation about we didn't get to the Supreme Court decision that you just mentioned, which is historic, without naming, of course, that it is specifically queer and trans activists, and especially Black women trans activists, who pushed and fought and died to get this here. Similarly, the Supreme Court also today ruled that the federal government, or that the local police cannot collude with ICE, that ICE cannot ask local law enforcement to go after undocumented people. These are all connected, right? And if South Asians who are listening today need this to come home, right? We have queer and trans folks in our community as South Asians. That's in South Asia and here. We South Asians, I believe, are almost, well, they're a huge percentage, and they're one of the fastest growing percentages of undocumented people in the United States, right? Approximately 10% of all undocumented people are of Asian descent, and the fastest growing share of that is in fact South Asians. In fact, we have Desi men, South Asian men, locked up in cages at the border right now, and their cases are horrific, along with the general horrors of locking children and families into the most barbaric of conditions. So when I see these are all related, you can't just care about yourself, because yourself is in this web of interconnection. And all the fiercest leaders of history have said this, right? That to be truly liberated means that every one of our liberation has to be true.
Here is Radyan, who's been posting, he's been kind of annotating your talk throughout. He says, my family was one of 8 Asian descent families in my school district in Brentwood, Long Island in the 70s. So while I had the mainstream hobbies of collecting baseball cards, comic books, etc., my brothers and I were honorary whites, but that ended when each of us reached an age to start dating. So I presume it became an issue. Paul is sharing Equity Labs, and Rose is tweeting and sharing your comments about the kind of work that you do. Radyan has linked to Estella Mara Ben-Simon's work, and Ashok is talking about an article in the Times of India from Chiddu Rajgata, and Radyan is linked to the Moynihan Report. So our friends are annotating your talk for us. Rick says, what is the absence in the US is a serious political debate about what is fair and unfair in the 2020 election, and what can we do to create an even more even playing field. And Mark is here. Mark was on our show. He's an amazing African-American leader and podcaster based in North Carolina. And he says, just today he had Robert Patillo on his podcast, a leading civil rights attorney from Atlanta. So much going on in Atlanta right now that's problematic. And Rick says we should follow the Canadian examples as acts of sacred respect. And Mark says, I have a cousin who's very strong in their Native American culture. My cousin actually makes her living by traveling the country performing at powwows, and she has her own dance company. I've been so proud to watch the progressive city of Durham has handled ICE and its unlawful raids. We were looking at your website, so let's, your company, your organization's website. Let's talk about this and what are we looking at and who are these people?
Sure, and I'm going to jump in. I just want to very quickly mention one of your colleagues brought up the concept of honorary whites, and it is a very tenuous status. You hold it until you don't. And here, during these times of COVID, has been a prime example of how anti-Asian violence has resurged in this anti-Chinese phobia, in hate crimes, in rhetoric, in violence against Asian and Asian American students, which of course has now led to Tom Cotton, can't even say his name out loud, pushing forward legislation to shut down graduate student visas for students from China, as well as limiting OPT and other things. So these things have both the interpersonal as well as the policy implications. And so, my friends, if you hold honorary white status, give it up to be in the collective struggle because it will be taken from you. These folks are my wonderful colleagues at the USC Race and Equity Center. You're welcome to visit our site, USC Race and Equity Center. Again, our work is focused on building skill and capacity for racial justice and racial equity for folks in colleges and universities, corporations, and other organizations across the institution. And it's heavily grounded in a critical race theory approach, as well as a practical approach, right? That we can learn, we can do better. We as educators have to believe that, of course. And Dr. Sean Harper, who is the founder of the center, who's directly to my left in that photo, he's one of the most prolific scholars on racial equity in schools and colleges and universities. So if you're also interested in that, Sean Harper, ShaunHarper, if that's something that floats your boat, check it out.
And this is a promo video. What are we seeing here? This the USC campus looks beautiful.
Campus, that's right. Fight on for any Trojans out there.
And this is very fancy. Very look at you, you're all levitating here. And that's Sean.
That's Sean giving a talk, and we try to do this in as many modalities as possible. We run multi-week learning programs, in-person opportunities. Right now, actually this Thursday, there is a free e-convening, live, virtual, available to anyone about white people talking to other white people about racism. So not asking folks of color to do that work for you, but white folks doing it for yourself. So if you'd like to check that out, I'm happy to share the link. It's an e-convening called White People Talking to White People About Racism, led by one of my colleagues, Dr. John Pasquarella, who's a wonderful educator.
Ashok says, can you please mention the website again?
Sure. It's the USC Race and Equity Center. And I probably should know the actual website.
Okay, hold on. I'll give it. Don't worry. It's race.usc.edu. Very easy. Race.usc.edu. That's a lot of weight to carry to be responsible for race at USC on there. So this is so interesting. And then look, Radyan is just posting away. Thank you, Radyan. He's just like annotating really well. So thank you very much. We only have a few minutes left. You still have to get dinner. If Sunil is watching and he wants to bring the kids in and say hello to us, we'd love to see him. You can maybe text him. He's probably not watching because the kids are making some noise. But we do want to ask you a couple of questions. What can people do to understand where the most useful thing they can do to help people is? One, on our show, we had Sunny Slaughter, who's a business leader in Washington, who said, people are going to their Black friends and saying, what can I do now? And their answer is, don't ask me what you can do now for us. Ask yourself, what have you been doing already? So granted, lots of people haven't done anything. So that 5 years from now, if something else comes up, what can they do to say at that time, here's what I've been doing these last 5 years. I watched Sumi Pendakur talk to us and I decided to do X. What are those X things that people can do? Ooh, look who's here.
Hi, Raja. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay.
Oh, look at this. Look at this. Hold on. This is too good.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Who are you?
Say your name, buddy.
My name is Shashi and I'm 7 years old.
I heard you just had a birthday in February. Is that true?
Yep.
Yeah. And who all came for your birthday?
Let's see. What was it again? Tata and Awa. Daddy and Dada. What else?
All your friends.
All my friends.
Cha-cha-cha-cha.
Cha-cha, Chachi, Milena, and Shia.
And how has lockdown been? Have you been doing remote schooling? Have you been studying online?
Yeah.
And is it good?
Yep.
Who's your main teacher, mommy or daddy?
Mama.
Mama. And tell us about your sibling over there. Who's that?
Who's this?
This is Shama. And how old is she again? 18 months.
18 months. She's catching up on you. Better watch out, buddy. And who's that holding your baby over there? Who's that?
Daddy.
Okay, what's his name?
Sania.
All right. Very good. So all S's, huh? All of you are S's.
And for those of you who are into the acting and media scene, my husband Sunil Malhotra is an actor, writer. He does a ton of voiceover work. He's voicing a number of cartoons right now, children's shows, a track phone commercial, all kinds of things. He was on Grey's Anatomy last year. So once we get back into production, you'll hopefully see him in more things this coming year.
That's great. How do we find Sunil and his work?
You can find me on IMDb. You can also find me at sunilmalhotra.com.
SunilMalhotra.com. Awesome. Thank you, Sunil, and thank you for letting us, making sure that Sumi has the time to join us here. I know it's dinner time and bath time and all that good stuff. So good luck.
Sree, none of us are able to do this, especially with the kids at home, without supportive partners. And we know the way that gendered work plays out. And so I really, really appreciate, and I know everyone else does, who has a full partner at home. So yeah. Want to say bye, and then I'll make one last.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for coming out. We really love seeing you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Say hi to your grandparents. 1 second. Your grandparents are watching. Say hi.
Hello.
Uncle Sree knows Tata and Awa. Can you believe it? Isn't that amazing? Okay.
Mind blown. All right, we'll let her go in just a minute. Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you for. You remember when on that BBC interview, the family, the baby came running and it was a disaster. Now this is a highlight of this is the apart from your righteous anger and teaching, that was the best part of the show. Having the kids come in and be part of it. I think we've become all more human in the process of these 90 days of lockdown all over. So you were telling us, what are specific things that people can do in the next days, weeks, months?
Here's the thing. We live in the age and era of the 24-hour news cycle, right? And so it is very easy that the minute this slips lower in your Facebook feed or your Twitter, feed, that all of a sudden attention can become diminished. And so what we'll see, of course, is that those who are involved in the movement, whether they are on the street as organizers, in policy associations, in educational entities, then there will be another subsection that has become enlightened, motivated, and mobilized in this moment that will continue to do their own self-education and continue to engage in the work. And then there's a very large market share that will peel off and say, well, I did put up that black square, and I did donate to one organization, and I did read a little bit on white fragility, and I did talk to my uncle once about his racist WhatsApp forward. And then they will peter off onto the next thing that triggers the 24-hour news cycle. And so I think my remarks, particularly for that, however much percentage of the community that is, to say that to follow the lead of Black organizers, Black women scholars is critically important. and at the same time, to not abdicate responsibility in any place you have influence. And that could be a wide variety of things. That could be donating to an organization of your choice on a monthly basis. Those types of monthly donations actually make more meaning than even just the one-time donation. It could be donating to a bail fund. It could be donating to a legal fund. So figuring out where your money, however much it is, $5, $500, $5,000, where it could be best used, because it can truly be used right now. So there's one source of actions. A second set of actions is this is about lifelong learning, right? The way that all of us drink in misknowledge about people who are queer and trans, about folks who are differently abled and disabled, about folks who are of different races, about folks who navigate the world differently from us, about folks who are undocumented, whatever it might be, of different faiths. We drink in so much misinformation. So the lifelong journey of continuously figuring out, why do I hold those beliefs? Where did they come from? Can I articulate why those make meaning for me? And where do they either open opportunities and doors for relationship, or where do they in fact create harm and closure? That is a wonderful process of lifelong self-examination and lifelong cultural humility that every single one of us needs to be able to engage in. And if there's one third thing I could say is, yes, talk to your Black friends, your Native friends, your queer and trans friends, your Daisy friends, whoever it is when you're trying to get information, but don't put the burden on them. I will tell you, Sree, that in the last 2 weeks alone, the number of requests I've gotten from people who say, can I please have this resource? Can I have this information? What do you think about this? On one hand, that's wonderful. I'm glad that your desire to learn is sparked right now, because of course, as an educator, that's where my heart is. At the same time, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted, psychologically and spiritually, utterly exhausted. And so you just keep giving. And at some point, the people who take have to say, I will go do this on my own. I will learn, I will commit, I will do better. And so I've got wonderful friends who are doing incredible concrete actions that will affect lifespans, right? So getting involved in your local school board and figuring out why they keep teaching the friendship feast, for example. At my son's school, that's going to be an ongoing discussion we're going to have. Why do you keep teaching this nonsense mythology about the friendship feast and about the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans? If we're taught lies, we continue to believe lies. So one of the last powerful...
You're shocking a lot of people right now who only remember that as the true story of Thanksgiving. Just very quickly, what is the issue with that?
Oh, sure. Just that the mythology that we're fed about this collective meeting of the Native communities in that particular area of New York and the white Pilgrims is founded on a lie, because a couple of days later, those white Pilgrims murdered those Native peoples. And of course, that is part and parcel of hundreds of years of murder, rape, forcible extermination, trail of tears, being forced onto reservations, all the way to today, when Native peoples are dying at some of the highest rates from COVID, right? Because COVID is highlighting every single inequitable factor in this society. So please feel free to look that up. But the larger point, of course, is that if we're taught this falsehood that these two groups came together at a level playing field, we actually missed, again, how inequities, how the uneven playing field is baked into our very conceptions of what America is. This is hard work. This is actually ripping apart the ideas of fairness and fair play and equality that America is supposed to be and supposed to represent. In its best moments, it has this possibility to do so. But in its worst moments, we see all the ways that it doesn't. So divesting ourselves of those lies that we've been told from childhood onwards is one concrete place to start. Because then you have a clearer vision of what it is you actually have to commit to, versus simply jumping in and saying, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll do that, right? What is your own role in making an impact towards justice writ large, when every single one of us is interconnected in our oppression and in our liberation? I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Those are very good thoughts on which we can now learn. I think you've given us lots of homework, things to read and watch and understand, but it all starts at race.usc.edu. And please follow her. She's Sumun Pendakur on Twitter. And I hope if she has a few minutes, she'll go on Facebook few days from now and just reply to so many of the other comments that came in. If you could do one more thing with us, we had the great scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, Columbia Law School professor, who coined the term intersectionality on one of my shows, and she said, Sree, say their names, and say their names of the people who we're talking about, who have sparked all of this, of course, George Floyd and others. And so we're basing this on the cover of Time magazine, which many of you have seen, and this is Titus Kaffer's cover of based on this photograph that I can show you of young George Floyd with his mother, Larsenia Floyd. Incredible picture and an incredible piece of art. And if it's okay with you, would you join me in saying their names? We have their names here, if you're comfortable with that. I'll have you say a few and stop, and then I'll say some, and then you can say some as well. So if we can, if it's all right. I know it's not easy, and I sprung this on you without asking.
But you're right, it is critically important to say their names, and of course say her name, because this originated from especially how Black women are rendered doubly invisible in the number of murders that have been committed against Black peoples. So let's say their names. I agree, Sree. The names are Trayvon Martin, Yvette Smith, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tanisha Anderson, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Jerame Reed, Natasha McKenna, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Sandra Blake,
Please go ahead. You're doing a great job.
Darius Stewart, Samuel DuBose, Janet Wilson, Kaylin Rockmore, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Joseph Mann, Terrence Crutcher. Did you want to jump in, Sree?
Chad Robertson, Jordan Edwards, Aaron Bailey, Stefan Clark, Danny Ray Thomas, Antoine Rose, Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And the list goes on and on and on and on, and goes all the way back to Emmett Till and the story there. Thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you for coming and spending time with us. I know people are still commenting, and so much. Look at Vandana, she says, yes, 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 yes. Thank you, Sumi, for what you said. Bhavani says, Dr. Sumi Pendakur is just beyond. Follow her, listen to her, and read everything she tells you to read. Thank you so much, says Rahadian. And Bhavani says, sister, preach. Bhavani says, yes. Lifelong learning. This is our friend in Kerala, in Trivandrum, Ashok Sharma. Thank you for being so enlightened and participating. Sujana Chandrasekhar says, amazing speaker. Thank you so much. Mark says, I think you have a couple of stars in the making with the little ones. And Radian is giving a shout out to Sunil and his behind the voice actors. Sweet family. I think you've been upstaged by your family here. Look at this. Sunilmalhotra.com. My mom says, lovely family, sweet baby. Ashok is inviting you all to Kerala. And Vandana says, Legend of Korra. So you can put that in context. Tell us what that is.
Absolutely. So my husband Sunil is a really popular voice actor. He does TV shows, cartoons, video games. So he voiced Prince Wu in the 4th season of Legend of Korra for any Korra fans. He voices Kung Lao in the new Mortal Kombat for any gamers out there. Also Jun in Halo Reach. And currently, if you have children at home, and I know you're using those screens because we are, he voices Stripes on Blaze and the Monster Machines on Nick Jr., as well as the character of Par on the Casa Grandes. Casa Grandes is Nickelodeon's new show, which is a spin-off from another show, which is wonderful. So
it's awesome. That is so cool. And Mark, by the way, is also pointing a very important point, and we should have said that. Rayshard Brooks, the young man killed in Atlanta when he got into a tussle. All he was doing was sleeping in his car in Atlanta in a drive-through. If you watch that video, 30 minutes of him kind of negotiating for the future of his life. And the mayor said, even though you know how it ends, you're begging them, just let him go. Just let him go. Who cares, right? Like, it's so inconsequential. And here we are. With that note, I have some housekeeping stuff to do, so I'm going to let you go to get back to your wonderful family. Thank you, Sumi, for being here, and I hope to see you in New York or in LA when things permit us to move around.
You're always welcome to our home, Sree, and thank you, everybody. I look forward to being in touch. If you'd like to get in touch, Sree has all my contact information, or at Sumun Pendakur on Twitter, and really looking forward to continue the conversation in solidarity. Everybody, take care. Bye.
Thank you. And I know, just I'll say that how much pressure people like you are under now to suddenly, the press that you might have been trying to court for specific projects for years, suddenly they're like looking up and say, they're Googling like who knows race in America and your name and Sean's name and everybody else. So there's a lot of pressure on you folks, and I appreciate you carved out time for us. Good night. Thank you very much.
Bye, Shree.
And she was awesome. Sumi Pendakur, please follow her, Sumun L. Pendakur on Twitter, and please connect with her. I have to go, as all of you do, but we have to thank our sponsors. That's our promise that we make to our sponsors. Art & Co. Get involved in the world's largest art auction, focusing on fundraising for COVID-19 victims, artandco.net, artandco.net. And look at this, Rutgers Global Entrepreneurship Experience Virtual Teen Camp. Maybe Sumi's young kids could go in a few years. At globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org, 20% off with the code SREE, S-R-E-E, globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org. And here we go, Fundamentals of Social Media, a free certification course, launches June 17th. It's all on demand, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. Thank you very much, everybody. A reminder of our Father's Day promo. You can't decide what to get a father figure in your life, or grandfather, uncle, male role model. Get them this, a shout out on 2 of our shows, the Father's Day show with Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times, so you know it'll be epic, and we'll read a message for your father, male role model, uncle, grandfather. Go to digimentors.link/Father's Day, or just email me, sree@sree.net, digimentors.link/Father's Day. Take a photo. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody. So many great comments coming in. Leela Spears says, she says, he deserved to live. Thank you. In solidarity. Jonathan says, thought-provoking program. Thank you. And Jonathan will be a guest on our 100th episode, which is coming up on Friday. We have had an incredible run of shows, and we are going into number 100 as strong as we possibly can. We have Sumi Pendakur tonight, Nick Kristoff and Cheryl Boudin. I'm interviewing them at 5 p.m. tomorrow, and we're going to rerun that interview at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Mitch Silver, the New York City Parks Commissioner, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, WHO's chief scientist, will be here, along with Dr. Sylvia Bryant, the director of pandemics at WHO. And we have lots of guests joining us on the 100th episode, including Jonathan Borstein, but also Noliwe Rooks, W.E. Du Bois Professor at Cornell. What an incredible title to have. Brandy Harden, lawyer and board member at Justice Aid, will be marking Juneteenth as well. And Anand says, thank you very much for the show. And can I rewatch? Yes, Leela, everything that you see, as soon as I hit goodbye, will come right back and you can see the entire collection. But the best way to see our shows is to please subscribe on YouTube. Sreenet, S-R-E-E-N-E-T, subscribe, and you'll get their entire archive of almost 100 shows. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye. Thank you. Email me, sree@sree.net.